So now that you understand what an XRM app is, I want to jump into how you build an XRM app. It's typically a combination of point-and-click customizations to compose your business application. Dynamics CRM provides a rapid application development environment where you can build out a lot of functionality without the need to write a single line of code. And then there are places, for example, you saw the Bing map integration in the 311 scenario, where you're going to need to write a little bit of .NET code for integration to external systems, for example, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to extend the UI, etc. And so we'll be going into the nuts and bolts of both point-and-click customization and code extensibility over the course of the next video or two. What's important to understand about XRM is it's all grounded in this thing we call an entity. An entity is nothing more than a way for defining a record in a system, and then those entities can be related to other entities. And in Dynamics CRM, you have the ability to create what we call custom entities as well as modify existing entities in the system. And through entities, you get what we call the Dynamics CRM ripple effect. When you create an entity, you get database table infrastructure created for you. So unlike some technologies that have this relational-like feel to them, but store the actual data in a fixed relational database schema, Dynamics CRM automates the creation of a relational database for you. So it creates tables, it creates database views, it creates foreign keys and some indexes. The beauty here is because it's a SQL Server relational database, all the best practices around performance optimization for SQL Server, including applying indexes and breaking up TempDB and putting data files and log files on different disks for performance optimization, all those things apply, right? Because in the end, it's just SQL Server. But when you create an entity, not only does it create database tables, but it creates the base UI forms over those entities for you and then allows you to modify them. It creates the core views, right? The saved queries, and also gives you the facility to build your own views using advanced find, that capability I showed you earlier. It gives you the facility to create charts. It gives you the facility to build reports using a power user wizard, as well as I'll talk about later, build even richer reports, because in the end, these reports are SQL Server Reporting Services reports. So as long as you have a SQL Server Reporting Services developer, you can effectively do just about everything you can do with SQL Server Reporting Services in a custom application within Dynamics CRM. You get mobile views of this information. You get the ability to take this subsets of these records and your application functionality offline using the Outlook add-in for Dynamics CRM. That whole security infrastructure, which we'll see more of, is there available for you, and you can granularly control who has access to what. And then, as I've mentioned multiple times, all of these entities and interaction with these entities are available to you over a web services layer that is enforced by role-based security, and that just kind of ripples back down. So what I want to do next is just walk you through some of the fundamental building blocks in point-and-click customization for XRM apps. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a brand new XRM application I've called XRM Nutshell. And if I go over to Dynamics CRM Deployment Manager, which is an administrative tool, you'll notice that I have multiple organizations in my server farm. And in Dynamics CRM terms, an organization is synonymous with an XRM application. And so you can create these by selecting new organization, and basically what it'll do is it'll give you a standalone SQL Server database for that XRM application that is isolated from all the other application databases. And so that's what I've done ahead of time. So I'm logged in as an administrator. And the first thing that I want to do is come into my settings, and in my solutions here, I've created something called the XRM Nutshell solution. I'm not going to go into great detail about what solutions are all about, But what this is going to serve as is the container for all the customizations that I make from here on out. And notice that this container is empty right now. At the end of this walkthrough, I'm going to be able to show you how I can take all the changes I've made and export them so that I can get a package that I can install to a different CRM environment. So I'm going to come back over and I'm going to go to Administration, Security Roles, and I'm going to create a new security role off of this template right here. Right? So I'm going to select that role and copy the role. And this is a template that I've created that I'll have a link to in the blog post called the Minimum Privileges Role Template. And so we'll call this the, for now, let's say it's the read-only role. And so notice that I have a read-only role now. So I'm going to come back over to my solution here, and I'm going to add an existing security role. I'm just going to add that role that I just created, right? Because remember, I want to export this as my installable package moving forward. All right, so I've got the read-only role in here, and we're good to go. Now what I want to do is I want to add a user to this instance because I want to show you from the very beginning the power of CRM's role-based security model. I'm going to come back over to Administration, Users. I'm going to create a new user. And that user is test user. They're already a user in my Active Directory. If I tab over, got everything that I need so far. I'm going to save this. Now that I've saved the record, I can come in here and assign a security role. So I'm coming in here and click Manage Roles and add this user to the read-only role. And we'll save and close this. Now we're good to go. So what just happened here? Well, if I come over here and launch Internet Explorer as a different user, and I type in test.user, and then we'll just go ahead and grab this same URL, and I navigate to XRM Nutshell as test user. Notice what you see here. This instance, I'm logged in as administrator, right? So let's go back to Workplace. This instance, I'm logged in as test user. Notice on the left-hand side, as the administrator, I see everything that's possible in the system. As the user who's logged in, constrained by role-based security, I see the very minimum things that the administrator wants me to see within the system. In fact, I only have one high-level navigation, and I can only see reports and dashboards. And I have less in the ribbon than an administrator has in the ribbon, right? And this is an example of CRM's role-based security in action. Okay, so now that we've established our first security role, let's go in and customize the system. Because right now, this is an application that is relatively useful for the limited access user. Right? There's really nothing that they can do in the system yet. Right? And again, we're in the test user view right now. I'm going to go back in the administrator view, my other browser instance. I'm going to come back to my solution. Now I'm going to start building out an entity. So I'll come in here and I'll say new entity. And we have to give this a name. So I'm going to keep this very generic. I'm going to call this a parent entity. There's a lot of details that I'm not going to go through since this is a high-level walkthrough. But we'll call this, give it a plural name. We'll call it parents. Change that there. I'm going to say go ahead and show a navigation link in the workplace section so that this shows up. And what I typically do with all of my entities is I just go ahead and disable all the defaults, all the functionality that's possible for them, and then I opt into them later. Notice that there's also a primary field called name. I'm going to go ahead and leave that as the default field, and I'll explain to you how this manifests itself in the user interface. And you can set this as required or not. And I'm going to leave these things as is. So I'll go ahead and save this, and then I'll publish it. And so if I come back to my main dashboard view and refresh the browser, notice that I have a parents link. I can come in here. I can create a new one of these. I'll get the CRM form, and I see the related information. And because I'm logged in as the administrator, I of course have access to save and close, etc. But if I switch over to that test user browser instance, notice I still don't have access to see the parents link. And of course, that's because of role-based security. So I'll come back over to my administrative view, and we'll open up the read-only security role. Come over to custom entities, and I'm going to give read access to the parent entity for this security role. So I save and close that. Now if I go back to the test user instance and I refresh, boom, based on role-based security, I actually have access. But if I select this, notice that I do not have the ability to create new records. But I do have Advanced Find available to me. So notice now if I select Advanced Find, I have access to create queries based on the parent entity because I have read access to it. All right, let's go back to the administrator browser instance. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some additional fields. Notice that right now I have no custom fields. I just have the built-in fields that CRM creates for some of its infrastructure. I'm going to create some custom fields. So we're going to call this first name, and it is required. Searchable means whether it shows up in that Advanced Find UI or not. Dynamic CRM supports field level security. I won't get into this in great detail in this walkthrough, but it's an important thing to understand. If you need to control access at the field level, that's something that's possible through configuration with Dynamic CRM. Dynamics CRM also supports auditing of every single element of data in the system based on turning the auditing function on or off. So out of the box, no custom code, complete auditing of all the records in your system, or auditing of certain fields and records in your system. In this case, I'm going to add a single line of text and say its max length is 100. I'm going to click Save and New to create another field. I'll call this last name. We'll make this required. Make it a single line of text. Save and New. Of course, you can guess the next one is middle name. And we'll say this is recommended. And this is just really a visual cue and metadata on the entity that can be interacted with programmatically. Again, this will be single line of text. We'll save and new. And we'll create a field called date of birth. No constraint this time. This time we want it to be date and time, date only, save and new. Now we're going to create something called eye color. And this time I want it to be what we call an option set. And you can define option sets on the entity, but then they can't be reused. Or you can have reusable option sets. So I'm going to use a reusable option set, except I'm going to create a new one because this one doesn't exist. So we'll just call this I color. We'll create red, green, blue instances. So we'll say brown, green, blue. Save and close that. So now I can reuse brown, green, blue on multiple entities. You can think of it, this is a great example of a state lookup or a state drop-down list, for example, Virginia, Maryland, etc. No default value, so we'll save a new here. And we'll say, are they a U.S. citizen? We'll make this 2 options. Yes, no. Default value, we'll say is no, because we want to force people to check that checkbox, for example. We'll save and new that. Now notice I'm not doing anything on the form right now. I'm literally defining the entity, right? The definition of the records in the system. And for now, we'll do one more. We'll say favorite number. We're going to make this a whole number, and we're going to give a arbitrary range. You can't have, can't be 0 or negative, and it has to be 100 or lower, right? Not sure that's a fair enforcement to restrict what people's favorite numbers can be, but let's just say that's the case. Okay, so I think we've got enough now. So I can go ahead and click Save and Close. And what's going on here each time is when the entity was created, as I mentioned, a database table got created. As fields are getting created, columns in a database table get created. And so what you're noticing here is that we've got a set of custom fields now, but I've got to put them on the form. So what I'm going to come over and do now is look at forms. And there are 2 forms. I'll focus on the main form for now. Mobile is for the Mobile Express feature of CRM that is beyond the scope of this walkthrough. But you can have multiple forms, and those forms can actually have security roles associated to them. So you can tie forms to different security roles, so as people log in, they have different views of forms. But in this case, we'll just open up the form designer. And now what we have to do is we have to bring things onto the form. And there's lots of things you can do. You can insert sections into the form, different tabs. These areas are what we call tabs, right? So I'll just go ahead and insert a 1-column tab just to show that now it generates 2 sections that you can jump to. So they're conceptually tabs, but they're not tabs in the traditional sense. So what it allows you to do is to have the same facility of a tab, but in a top to bottom kind of organization for better rapid data entry, as well as now giving you these sort of jump to link sections. So let's go ahead and grab, let's say first name, last name. Let's take middle name. Let's take eye color, obviously. Date of birth, whether they're a U.S. citizen or not, and their favorite number. All right, so that's basic form layout. There's a lot more to form layout, but hopefully you get the basic idea. And in fact, let's go ahead and move this up there, and let's move these to this tab just for grants, right? So you kind of get the basic understanding of form layout once you've defined fields on an entity. So I can save and close all of this. But notice that if I actually come over here and I try to create one of these, I don't see anything on the form. Well, that's because I haven't published the customizations that I've just made. So to do that, we'll come to the entities here, select parent, and publish all the customizations for the entity. And since fields and forms and everything else are related to the entity, I can publish at the entity level, and all those changes get reflected in the system. All right, so now if I come back over here and I create a new one, notice the form now has all these aspects on this. And so, I can say, if I try to save this right now, it's going to say, hey, you have to provide a value for name, right, for all the required fields. Give me drop-down list for eye color, nice little date control for date of birth. And if I, for example, try 110 here and tab out, it's going to say, hey, it's in the wrong range. Let's just finish this out. John Doe. Favorite number is 5. And notice for recommended, it just has a little indicator here that says, hey, we really want you to fill this out. So John, but John doesn't have a middle name, so we'll just go ahead and click Save and Close. Or I could click Save and New to create another new record. And we'll say Jane Doe. Not a U.S. citizen. She has blue eyes, and favorite number is 3. In this case, I'll say Save and Close. It'll bring me back down to my main UI, and now we have entries. So great. We've done some basic form editing. And again, if I come over to my test user and I refresh this now, I can see I can't create, I can't update, but I can review the information. All right, so I'll go back to my administrative user. But this isn't exactly super meaningful because we only see name and created on. So this is a view. It's called the active parents view. So what we want to do here is come into our views for our entity, find the active parents view, open that up, and we want to add columns. So we'll just say, we'll add eye color, I don't know, favorite number, that's good. And we'll move created on over to the right here, save and close that. Again, we'll publish. Notice that these are now visible in the view. All right, so I'm going to go create a few more records so we have a little bit more data to work with. Okay, so we've got a few more users in the system now, so let's do a couple other things. Let's go back over to solution here and let's create a chart. We'll create a new chart, and it'll be based off the active parents view, and we want to take eye color and we want to count it, and we'll make our horizontal axis eye color too. So we can see that we've got various folks with different eye colors and some with blank eye colors. All right, so we'll go ahead and save and close that. And again, we can publish this. Of course, you don't typically go through, do a little change and publish, do a little change and publish. You do a bunch of these changes, and once you're ready, you publish them collectively. So now if we come over here and refresh, notice there's a chart over here. If I come over to the test user and I refresh, they have the chart as well. And we can do that same sort of drill through, select field, and maybe pivot on favorite number. let's go ahead and take these two, refresh the chart, select those, pivot on favorite number, and we can see they both have a blank favorite number. And I can also obviously use advanced find. And I can say, you know what? I want to see who has a favorite number that is greater than 2 and a favorite number that is less than, let's say, 5. Boom. All right, so I can use that power of that advanced find ad hoc query tool to really get answers to my own questions about the data. All right, I'm still in the test user view. Let's go back to the administrator view. So far, we've built an entity. We've done some basic interaction with the form. We showed role-based security. We built, modified a view. I've showed you already how you can create your own views with advanced find. We've shown charting. So next thing what I want to do is show you how you can define relationships between entities. So you probably guessed it. We're going to come back over here. I'm going to create a new entity called a child entity. In this case, we're not going to have it show in navigation, but I am going to go ahead and turn off all this built-in functionality for now until I want to opt into it later. So I'll save this. You know, I'm not going to bother with putting anything else into this for the interest of time. I'll just save and close this. But now what I want to do is I want to go to the parent entity, which I'm on. I want to create a one-to-many relationship. And again, I can filter down to custom relationships. There aren't any yet. So we'll just go ahead and create one. And so the primary entity is going to be the parent. The related entity is going to be the child. Give it a display name of children. And then here we can do things like specify the relationship behavior, right? Is it a parental relationship? Is it referential? Is it configuring cascadable, where you can do things like define what happens, when deletes, merges, shares, unshares, etc. So there's a lot of control that you, again, traditionally have to implement in custom code that you can configure in terms of defining your entity relational model. In our case, we'll just take parental. Notice that it kind of defaults to cascading of everything. We'll save and close this. Notice now when I go over to the form and I open up in design view, you'll see that children shows up in the comments section. And that is because, remember, the form represents an instance of a record in the system, and this left-hand navigation represents all the entities in the system that have relationships to this particular record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this stuff up here. I'm going to switch the navigation and remove this simply by selecting the remove button. And I'm going to insert into this tab by going back to the body section what we call a subgrid, because I want that data to be shown in line in the form. We'll call this children subgrid. And it's going to be only related child records. Good. And I can just suggest whether, if I've got lots of records, I display the search box or not. If I want to display the chart selection or not, we'll go ahead and take that off for now and click OK. And let's rename this tabs property to children. Right, notice that children is now a navigable link over here. Now if I save and close this, and in this case, I'm going to publish all customizations because I've modified both the parent and the child entities. And so that's sort of the brute force easy button to publish all of your changes instead of selectively publishing your changes. Okay, now I can go back over here, refresh the main UI inside the browser, select parents, open any one of these. Come in here, notice that the ribbon, when I selected the children subgrid, becomes contextual, and I can add a new child. Let's say a child. Boom, there we go. And of course, this is driven based on a view, so I could modify that view, and you kind of get the pattern moving forward. So let's edit one of these real quick. Let's give couple more real eye colors. Notice I can save that, and right from within here, I can pick a different user, right? So I can say, C user. And I'll just go ahead and grab blue, save that, and let's pick a user. Okay, so we should be good. We've got enough folks with eye colors now. And of course, my chart updates real time based on the data. So let's go over and create a dashboard now. So notice we don't have any dashboards here, so I'll come back over to my solution, come down to the dashboard section. I'm going to create a new dashboard. We'll just call this a 3-column regular dashboard. And dashboards allow you to basically pull other pieces of the system together in a high-level view. Now we'll get into web resources later. Web resources are one of the extensibility capabilities, but you can basically drop charts, lists or subgrids, web resources, and iframes. Right? So iframes is sort of your escape hatch. You can point to anything outside of CRM. And so, for example, if you have single sign-on configured across, say, Windows Azure and Office 365, you can iframe certain things from those external systems right into the dashboard. But in this case, we'll create a chart. In fact, let's cancel out of there, put the chart there, and let's go for charts off of the parent entity by eye color. Boom. Add something to the chart there, or to the dashboard there. Here we're going to go, again, based on the parent entity, active parents. We'll go ahead and take that view. And we'll just go ahead and spread this one across the form there. And we'll just call this, my first dashboard. Save and close that. Go ahead and publish that chart. Now we have our first dashboard. There we go. It's got the chart and the data that we want to represent at a high level view, right? And so of course you kind of get the picture. You can embed basically whatever you want here. As we get into reports, you can embed reporting services reports. You can embed anything that can basically be brought into any one of these layouts. And these layouts are highly configurable. So let's go over to reports. We don't have any reports there, so let's come in and create a report. So we'll create a new report. Now there are multiple types of reports in Dynamics CRM. Most people think of reports in Dynamics CRM as SQL Server Reporting Services reports. And in the most common case, they absolutely are. And in fact, SQL Server Reporting Services is part of the install for Dynamics CRM. However, a report in Dynamics CRM really is just an entity. It's metadata about reports. And when you either use the report wizard or you manually upload a reporting services RDL file, Dynamics CRM automates the publishing of that report to the report server. But you can also just upload a PDF. And you can also upload an Excel file. You can create a link to an external report server or an external web page for that matter. And then you can provide some metadata about that report so that it's contextually available within the CRM UI. So it's more easily discoverable for your end users. But the first thing we'll show is just a very simple report wizard report. And what this wizard does is it gives you the ability to automate the creation of a SQL Server reporting services report. So I'll create a new report, call it my first report. We'll say its primary record type, of course, is parent because that's what we've been working with. Click next. Go ahead and remove that. And we'll just take all the report records. So we'll add a grouping. In this case, we want to group by, let's say, eye color. And then we want name, U.S. citizen, and favorite number. And we'll click OK. You can do things like configure sorting and column grouping and that sort of thing. We'll just keep it simple for now. So if you want to add charts to this report, integrated in this report, you can do that as well. There's a little bit more effort that you need to go through there, and the instructions, the information indicator kind of goes into that. But I'll just go ahead and click next for simplicity's sake. And so this is literally creating a reporting services RDL file, uploading it to the report server, and then making it available to be viewed. So notice now I have this run report button. So I clicked it, the report's being generated, and I was able to create a very simple report without having to know anything about building reporting services reports. So again, this is a power user feature, but because this is a reporting services report, you can build full-fledged, highly advanced reporting services reports for your users to use, complete with filterable drop-down lists and all that good stuff. Actually, let's open that back up. Notice also, where do I want this displayed in? I can say I want it displayed in the form for related record types drop-down. Well, maybe I don't want it there, but I do want it in the reports area in the list for related record types. So let me go ahead and click OK. Save and close that. Notice now when I refresh, and I go into parents here, under run report, my report is there and I can click on it. All applicable records, all records on the page, so it's contextual. It's also in the reports section, but if I click on the record to bring up the form, notice it's not in this drop down here, and that's because I removed the option to show it in the form. So you have granularity as to where you show certain reports within the user interface. Okay, so we've created some entities, created some option sets, done some form editing, we've worked with security roles, reporting, charting, dashboards. What if I want to modify the navigation here? Right? What if I want to add another section for a user to see and allow them to navigate somewhere? Well, that's done with something called the sitemap. So I'm going to come back over here, and in my solution, I'm going to add an existing item. And I'm going to select the sitemap. And the sitemap when you go into the SDK, what you'll learn is it's an XML file that defines the navigation and role-based security trimming of the navigation in the UI. And so now that I've got it in my container, because I want to eventually export my changes, I'm going to come over here and launch a tool that is my favorite tool for sitemap editing. It's called the CRM Sitemap Editor, and I'll have a link in my blog post to where you can go to download this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a new area, and let's select that. We'll give it a name, an ID, so we'll call it the external links area. Give it a title of external links. And we'll just pick an existing icon. Later on, I'll explain to you how you can upload additional icons using what we call web resources, but I'll just use this for now. And I'm going to keep show groups unchecked. And then I'm going to take this sub area and I'm going to call it Bing. Bing Maps. All right, so give it a title, call it Bing Maps, and then we'll just give it a URL, http bingmaps.com. Now there's a lot more that you can do with creating, sitemaps, etc. You can apply security trimming to it, etc. It's sort of beyond the scope of this high-level walkthrough of XRM, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how you modify this thing we call the sitemap. Let's change this group. Bing, call that. I'll say Bing there, and then let's go over here and let's create another one, and let's call this just Bing search, and we'll say http bing.com. Bing search. And let's go ahead and move this up. And again, if I had icons, I could select them in the interest of time. I'm not even going to select an icon this time. All right, publish succeeded. Now if I go back to our instance here and I do a refresh, I'm logged in as the administrator right now, so I can see everything. Notice I got this link high-level navigation called external links. I got Bing search and Bing Maps. Right, and if I come over to the logged in user that's test user and I refresh this, they now have an external links option and they have Bing search and Bing Maps. And this just sort of gives you the idea of how now you can start to integrate external sources into your overall user experience. As we talk more about the SDK, this can actually end up being a custom ASP.NET page that still interacts with and calls back into CRM for data, etc. So the last thing I want to talk about that you can customize is the ribbon. Right, so if I come over to my administrative instance, let's say I want to add a button to one of these forms, right? So a user, for example. I'm going to add a button in here that does something. It takes some action in the form. Maybe it goes through and, really the possibilities are endless. And in fact, as we get into the SDK, what you'll find is that with a combination of buttons and client-side scripting, you can do all sorts of very interesting things. And not only can you in client-side scripting show and hide controls in the form and that sort of thing, but you can also interact with the data in the form, etc., to do things again like calculations and the kinds of UI logic that you might want to do client side before you try to save the record. So I come over to settings, solutions, I've installed this tool called the Ribbon Workbench. And again, it's another tool that I'll provide a link for in my blog post, but it helps you easily modify the ribbon. So we'll pick the solution that we're working in. And notice that I have the option now to select my parent entity, and then I can select different ribbons. The homepage ribbon, the form ribbon, the subgrid ribbon, the jewel. In my case, I'm going to select form. And here I'm just going to add a button. Usually the pattern is that you're going to wire this up to some client-side JavaScript that's going to do something within the form, or make a call back to CRM web services, or kick off a workflow, or what have you, right? And so you can remove things from the ribbon, you can add things to the ribbon, etc. Now I'm not going to do anything here yet. Usually what you do once you make all your changes, you publish this back to the CRM server. But in our case, I want to kind of introduce the fact that you can modify the ribbon from a point-and-click customization perspective, but also that you typically wire it up to code as well. All right, so the last thing I want to do is show implementing a business process. As I mentioned earlier on, there are two types of business processes. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a new business process. There are dialogues and workflows. Workflows are non-visual business processes, long-running business logic, and dialogues are what you saw in the 311 example, which is that sort of wizard-like experience. We're going to start off by creating a workflow on the parent. I'll call this my first workflow. It's going to be new blank, and it's going to be a workflow. And what we'll get here is the in-browser workflow editor. This is geared towards power users, business analysts, non-developers, to enable them to be able to actually implement business logic. You can create these to execute on demand, and so typically what people will do is they'll add a button to the ribbon, and when you click that button, it executes a workflow, and that could be a escalation business process or a manager review business process, for example. There's all sorts of options. Workflows can be programmatic, meaning that you can have a workflow call another workflow, and so you can enable this to be called as a child process from a parent workflow. You can do things like execute this when the record is created, execute this when specific fields in the record change, etc. But in this case, we'll just do this when the record's created. And then you have these things that we call workflow activities. And this really is the meat of your composable business logic. So I'll come in here and I'll create what's called a check condition. And I'll say, if the record that was just created has a, let's say, eye color of green. So that's my condition, so I'll save and close that. Then what do I want to do? Well, I select add a step, right? These steps are also what are called workflow activities. And depending on where you are in this workflow designer, you have different things that you can do. I always tell people that it may not look like you can do much, right? Because you basically can check conditions, have conditional branches, you can do wait conditions, you can have parallel branches, and then you can basically create, update, assign records, start child workflows, send an email, etc. But once you understand that everything in CRM is an entity fundamentally, then you really kind of start to realize the power here. And then on top of that, developers can build what we call workflow activities to provide to power users. And we'll talk about that later on in the part 2 video. But imagine that you want to, as part of a business process, you want to call to an external web service. Maybe it's an external rules engine or a system that already exists that you pass some values to and it'll give you some values back. And based on the results sent back, you want to go down different conditional branches. the way you accomplish that is you have a developer write a very few lines of code workflow activity that they deploy to the server, and then you can just pull that in. It'll show up in this add steps section, and you'll be able to actually pass data into it and then make decisions based on the data that comes back from that step that they've given you or that workflow activity. So in this case, we're just going to update the record, and we're going to say, you know what, just update that existing record that was just created, and let's go ahead and force them to have a favorite number of 15. I know it's a bad example. We'd never want to do something like this, but just kind of gives you a sense for the mechanics. You can also do things in workflows such as dynamic values, so you can pick variables from within the workflow, operators, existing entities that you have access to, related entities, etc. And then you can kind of dynamically build values, etc. on this forms designer. But in this case, we'll keep it very simple just to kind of show you the mechanics of creating a workflow. We'll save and close this, and we're done. So I'll save this, and I'll activate it. So now this piece of business logic is live and running. So I'll go ahead and close this. Come back over to Workplace, and we'll create a new one of these folks. I think I said green, right? So let's just save this. Notice after I've saved it, because I'm the administrator, I have the ability to see the workflows. Notice if I go over to my read-only user and I open this, notice that I can't see the related workflow because I don't have permissions to do so. All right, so let's go back over to this form. We just created this record, and if I select workflows, you'll see that the workflow succeeded, and I can open it up, and I can see that it in fact did hard code their favorite number. So now, if I look at this record again, you'll see that their favorite number was populated by that workflow. And this just gives you a taste of how to create a workflow, but workflow in and of itself is a much more advanced topic to learn about all the powerful things that you can do with them. Okay, so with that, we've gone through the core fundamentals around point-and-click customization for building data-centric business applications or XRM applications. In the next video, we'll walk through the developer side of things and how developers can extend the point-and-click customizations through things like .NET development, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS programming on top of what you've already seen.